One of the things it seems that people love about Arweave is that it goes beyond speculation. It actually is functional and it has a lot of utility. So how do you differentiate between speculative tokens and like the true functionality of certain Web3 projects?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think you kind of have to separate the token from the stuff people are building because token price is driven by a lot of things. It's driven by like the tokenomics and just, whatever the kind of flavor of the month is. So I look at a lot of crypto projects and their current token valuations, and a lot of it looks pretty speculative. And, there's definitely value in Arweave, but there's a lot of speculation going on there too. But when I look at what's being built, people are building a lot of real projects. I would say most of the project people are trying to build are real things. It's like any startup, like a lot of those things are going to fail, but it's not because they're not trying to build real things. There's a lot of attempts to build real things. And that's what, really interests me about the ecosystem and keeps me interested in it.
You're tuned to the ArCast, where we talk about the blockchain on the ArCast and how your data remains. It's the ArCast, where ArDrive is the topic, censorship-resistant permanence. Yeah, we got it. We're back again with episode 11 of the ArCast. This week, we've got Madison, Wisconsin's David Whittington, who not only does a lot of great work for ArDrive and RIO, he's also the man who popularized the elephant emoji you see in all the Arweave-themed posts. So shout out to David. It was a really great interview. Thanks to all the ArDrive users who came out to our New York meetup. We had a special visit from Sam Williams in front of the New York Public Library. Here's our interview with David Whittington. All right, friends, welcome back to the ArCast. And this week we have a guest who couldn't be more perfect for the themes of this podcast, David Whittington, who is an RIO system architect, and he's the CEO of Strong Data Labs. And he has a Patreon where he makes videos about Arweave. He knows a ton about everything. And so I wanted to welcome David to the ArCast. Welcome, David. Where are you based? Unless it's secret.
I grew up in central Illinois, and then went to school in Indiana. I spent some time out east in Pennsylvania, but I kind of wanted to move back closer to family, and they're all in the Chicago area, and that's a little bit too much like urban sprawl for me. So Madison, Wisconsin seemed like a nice area. I've done remote work for a long time, so I can kind of pick where I want to live, and it seemed like a nice place. So that's kind of where I ended up.
Madison, it's interesting because it's a big college town. When we tour, it's always like one of the best places to play because people there are really friendly and nice. I have someone I work with there who designs games. He's an indie games designer. Would you say there's like a big tech community, or is it so decentralized?
No, there's a pretty active tech community. University of Wisconsin in Madison is, I want to say, I don't know, it's definitely a top 20 like software engineering school, and the area is big enough that it tends to retain a decent amount of talent. There's a lot of like healthcare IT here too. So yeah, there's a pretty good, like software crowd here. I think there's even some like crypto community. I haven't actually got involved in the local community there yet, but I think there is some around. So yeah, it's a pretty nice area if you want to, not be in a giant city, but still have like some startup culture and tech culture, that kind of thing.
And if you're missing the big city, Chicago's really it's like just a few hours away, right? It's
just a couple hours. So it's super easy to get there. Actually, my family's going there next week for a little spring break trip. So yeah, it's really easy to get to big cities. Milwaukee is actually pretty nice too. I have a lot of interesting stuff there.
Yeah, it's cool because I love doing this podcast because I love hearing people's stories about what brought them to Web3, what they're optimistic about, what it says about the zeitgeist of the changing world, how the internet has made us really look at each other differently and the world differently. And you're someone who has a lot of knowledge specifically about Arweave, amongst other things. So we'll just start there. Like, how long have you been into Web3 or blockchain? Like, what was your first exposure to it?
So it's kind of, come in fits and starts for me. So I was intrigued by Bitcoin very early on, played with it a bit, did some mining, that kind of thing, but never got like super into it. I never was like, I'm not independently wealthy now. I wasn't a believer enough to like put a bunch of money into it, but I always thought the whole, having a decentralized ledger that people can write things to and some notion of decentralized currency or store of value, whatever you want to call it, was super interesting. It was always unclear to me how it would play out and what it would be valuable for. I think some of that we're still figuring out, but whenever a fundamentally new technological capability emerges, I have a lot of faith that some application will come from it, even if it's not obvious what it will be. So I think some of that we're still figuring out. But anyway, so I had some interest early on, but never really like dove all the way in. And I've just been kind of keeping an eye on it. And then last year, I guess last year and like the year before, so like 2020, 2021, it's like, oh, things are starting to happen, so I should check in on this again. And when I looked at it this time, like, oh, wow, people have actually built a lot of stuff, and some of it seems to be real stuff that people are using. So that intrigued me. And then I stumbled across Arweave, and my technical background is, a lot of like database storage systems, functional programming, that kind of thing. And so when I realized you could maybe do permanent storage, like it hadn't occurred to me that was a thing you could do in a scalable way. That really, really caught my attention, because I think that changes a lot of things in the technology world. And so that's why I kind of dove in. It's like, okay, I have to figure out some way to do something with this, and eventually had an opportunity there and just have been working at it ever since.
You're doing something, you're working for the team, doing something that hasn't been done before, like truly decentralizing the gateway in an exciting way. How would you explain that to like let's say my mom, she listens to this podcast. How would you explain what your role is, like in a very layperson way? Not that my mom doesn't understand this stuff, but like you're obviously passionate about Arweave and all this. So how would you explain?
Yeah, so I've thought about this a bit. I think it's a challenge to explain, and part of it is it's not clear, just from the marketing, what Arweave is missing that you would need to add to it in the first place. So you kind of have to start there. So Arweave, as it stands right now, there's a gateway for it, arweave.net, and it is, more or less a centralized service that sits in front of a decentralized network, and it's the thing that's providing everyone access to it. There's nothing that stops other people from building and running gateways, but it's not an easy thing to do. So no one, and the main one works pretty well. So no one has really stepped up to do it. I think even without RIO, if you just kind of ran the network forward into the future, eventually other people would do it, but it would probably not happen as quickly. So what is that thing doing, right? So the incentives of Arweave are basically, if you give it data, it promises to store it. And there's this game, like game theory style game, incentive game between the people storing the data that gives them an incentive to share the data with each other, because they need to get access to each other's data to get paid for storing it. But there's nothing in that whole picture that says, okay, these people are storing it. They don't have to share it with anyone besides each other. Now, the default way that Arweave is configured, you can go in and access some of the data. It's not like it's locked down. However, bandwidth has a cost. And so over time, what you'd expect to happen is the people that don't have an incentive to share the data with you, the user of the network, would do it less and less. So you'd probably retain some access to it. But unless you are participating in this data exchange, they don't really have a strong reason to prioritize your traffic. So it's kind of like, I was trying to think of a good analogy for this. It's kind of like you have a friend, and you're like moving or something, you're paying your friend to store your stuff. And you just give your friend some money and you give them the instructions like, I'm going to give you this money and you're going to store this stuff for me. But your friend is very literal. And so they just take the stuff and they throw it in like this big dumpster with a whole bunch of other stuff. And then later you come to them and you're like, give me the stuff back. And they're like, whoa. You just gave me money to store it, not give it back. So the gateway network is all about getting the stuff out. you need to somehow incentivize that. And the other thing that I would add on to that is like, ideally, you don't store it in a dumpster. You put it in boxes with labels. You have some way of indexing it so people can find the stuff they want. And that's what the gateway networks are about.
Let me ask you this. How does this dovetail with the Web 2 notion of net neutrality?
That's interesting. So, net neutrality actually used to work for ISP too. So this is, that whole conversation is interesting. So net neutrality is mostly about prioritizing traffic, at least it narrowly defined. So I do not think the gateways are going to solve the problem of guaranteeing everyone access to all the pieces of the data all the time without paying for it. Someone still has to pay for it. And my assumption is that if you pay enough, someone will give you access to the data. But I do expect that there will be a variety of gateways that have sort of different views on Arweave for a variety of reasons. One is just scale. It's going to be hard for, especially smaller gateway providers to provide uniform access to the entire weave. So there will probably be different views of it and probably different incentive strategies around providing access to it. So I don't know. It's kind of that whole space is kind of complicated and hard to break down.
Yeah.
And I don't think we have complete solutions for all of it. But that's my attempt to answer that.
I think that so much of what makes this space interesting to me is that it's speculative, it's new, it's exciting because everything's being figured out, and the elements of how this can be helpful socially and historically, technologically. And, I was just wondering, what brought you to ArDrive? Like, how did you find out about the project and come on board? What was your first time you'd heard about ArDrive just existing?
Remember the very first time I saw it. It might have been, linked from some Arweave team thing somewhere, just saying like, this is a thing that's been built. But I came across it very early on. And it's actually one of the things like, oh, yeah, this looks like a, reasonably professional effort by people who have some idea what they're doing. So it was like a kind of a stamp of credibility to some degree on the network in my view. And, it seemed like a relatively obvious thing to do to build something like that on it. And it seemed like it filled a interesting and, useful niche in the ecosystem. So yeah, I found it really early on, and that's kind of, I got to it, but I don't actually remember. I think it is some site I clicked on, like researching Arweave, because like my first task when I found the network is like, okay, someone says they can store things permanently. Can that actually work? And I just spent a whole bunch of time trying to figure out if the thing can actually work. And so I researched all kinds of stuff about the network during that time. Like a true system architect, you wanted to draw your own conclusions, right? Like the crypto, there's a lot of noise in the crypto space, and there's stuff that just flat out doesn't work. So you got to figure it out.
You're one of the only people I know who's also a YouTuber with a Patreon page where your whole thesis is creating videos about Arweave, which I think is really cool. As you have time for that, like when you do, like tell me about what you're passionate about Arweave and how it's been trying to create this content based on it outside of your other job.
Yeah, so the thing, Arweave has this really great and I think effective marketing pitch that it's the censorship resistant platform, right? And I think that is super important. I absolutely do not want to downplay that. And I think it's also like a really good pitch for the network. That is not the thing that like really excites me about it. The thing that excites me is that it's not a place to put your data. It's like a global address space that's not tied to any specific physical location. And that has really big like system architecture implications. So if you look at the web now, like if you go to a website, you go to google.com, like what's it doing? You put an address in there. It kind of seems like it just exists, but it doesn't. What it does is it's going to look up some set of servers via DNS, and those servers exist in a place, and it's going to go to that place and it's going to find that data. That's a great system, and it has a lot of, that's an easier to bootstrap system in some ways, and it's got a lot of nice scalability properties that have brought us, as far as we have with the web. But all of that is reliant on people maintaining those places to go and maintaining that linkage. In other words, Google can pop into and out of existence, and it's impossible to get a snapshot of this whole system, like the whole web at one time. But with Arweave, you can actually say what is on Arweave at a point in time, and it doesn't depend on any individual in that whole network maintaining anything. The network just has to exist, and then you can ask the network, like, what did you know at this point in time? And everything is globally addressable, independent of a location. It's just about the data. And that really changes the way that you can use the system. You can put data into it and not have to rely on any single party to maintain it. And then you can rely that that data is going to be there in the future. And that just changes what you can build a lot. So like a few examples of things that people like don't know that we're missing in the web right now, which will maybe make the sort of more nebulous technical stuff a little clearer. So you don't think about it a lot, but it's really hard to, like, say you have a blog, like you're one of those people who still has a blog, and you want to embed some content from someone else's blog. Like say you want to quote a piece of text. The way we currently do that is you copy it, right? And like, why do you copy it? You don't even think about that, but like you're usually going to copy it, and the reason you do is because you can't rely on the thing that you're copying from still being there and not changing. Arweave totally changes that. If you want to embed some content, you can just address it. You can say, like, I know where it is in Arweave, just look there and render it in this other place, and no one can change it ever. It's possible you somehow lose access to it because like a gateway is not providing you access, but I think for most content that becomes popular, that's really a non-issue. So that enables this kind of really rich embedding of content from different places that's not dependent on any service providers maintaining that content in the future. Another thing that's really hard to do that like people don't even know is a thing you can do for the most part is backlinks. So when you're browsing the web, you have all these links you're clicking on, right? And they're like outward bound links. I'm on a page, it's telling me I can go here, I can see some other thing, but you don't see all the inbound links. And why not? It's because that's a really, really hard index to maintain, and it's changing all the time. In fact, you can't even get a whole snapshot of the web to get that index, at a point in time. But if none of the data is changing in the past, you can at least say, like, okay, what are all the links that point into this page, as of this particular time? Being able to search and see some of those would be very, very valuable. And it's just something we can't build right now. So I think the technical capabilities that Arweave provides to let us build novel things that are completely impossible are really, really compelling. And I think, I have this broader thesis of like, it's related to the censorship idea that, you talk about the memory hole, being able to change the past is very useful for controlling a population at a point in time in an authoritarian regime. But that's a broader thing. It's like learning is based on knowledge of the past. So I think that the more we can retain and sort of index and understand the past, the faster we can learn. And there's a lot of problems that we need to solve in the world that actually heavily depend on our learning rate. Like energy problems, problems with healthcare, like all those things depend on us being able to learn quickly. So anything we can do to accelerate that, I think, is pretty important right now, because I don't think we can go backwards in technology. We have to figure out how to go forwards productively.
People who are optimistic about the future of our humanity and the future of the planet and the future of being able to be very efficient with data, people who believe in that are champions of Arweave outside of like the political element of the censorship resistance. And I think about how, my background coming from the music industry, so much music that I put out on platforms like MySpace or even mp3.com, you can't find it, or bands I loved, it's gone.
Yeah,
and
totally.
so it's like, it fills a need for people of our generation who saw how Web 1 and Web 2 kind of promised a lot, but didn't deliver in the long run.
Definitely. Yeah. Like YouTube really stresses me out because I think YouTube is one of the most phenomenal education resources that has ever been created. It's great. Like Google, these centralized providers get a lot of flack, but like they do a lot of great stuff. But like who's to say that will be with us in 50 years? I have no idea. So if we can back that up and provide ways to preserve access to it, that would be incredibly valuable. The amount of like tacit knowledge of like, hey, I want to fix my furnace or something that's on YouTube is just like mind blowing. It's never existed before. It's incredible.
So David, speaking of YouTube, like I agree, it's a great resource, and you have a very original, cool channel that I saw is linked through your Patreon, and you help fund it through your Patreon. Let's talk a little bit about how you use YouTube to educate people.
Yeah, so that was kind of has an interesting origin story. So I started out just building the project, this decentralized mining pool. But I was coming from a place where I would do a lot of pair programming, which is basically like two people programming together at the same time. And I was kind of missing that workflow. And like one part of the workflow there is you're, verbalizing what you're doing, and just doing that much is actually pretty good feedback and helps you clarify your thinking. So I was, not having another person, I was like, okay, I could just do this and stream it, and it would have like a dual purpose. It's like kind of marketing, education, and this like substitute for pair programming. So that's how I started. And, I've had like pauses here and there, but, I've just been doing that. And then later on I did some, I don't know what they call them exactly, sort of more lecture oriented almost videos. I don't like that. I don't like that labeling, but I haven't thought of a better term. Basically it's like sharing some thoughts about how Arweave can be used. And part of what I want to do is I actually did a Kickstarter a while back for a game that I developed. So there's like a certain set of people who are following me from other like areas of the technology world. And so I figured, okay, if I put content out there, it may reach some of those people too. So I was hoping that like, okay, I make these videos, they'll serve this role for me, and then they'll also potentially draw some other people into the ecosystem. So I don't know if they've done that, but they've been useful, at least for me. And I think they've, provided me some like marketing in the ecosystem. So it's, worked out pretty well. And then sort of along the way, I've had people just asking if they could sponsor it. And so I set up the Patreon. I was like, sure, why not? Like, certainly not going to hurt. And so that's where that came from.
Okay, so Zeta War is the game. So if y'all Google that, Zeta War, explain the game in like briefly if you want.
Yeah. Awesome. So the closest thing that like a wide audience might know about is Advance Wars, which was I think came from Game Boy way back. So Zeta War is like kind of like that. It's like a turn-based strategy game. You have these little units, like tanks and people, and you move them around on a map in a turn-based way, and you're trying to take over bases, and like the bases provide resources, and then that lets you build more units, etc. And there's a whole bunch of different games of this genre. I made it because there was this game We War, which was kind of this fun web game that existed for a long time, and then EA shut it down. So this is actually somewhat related to Arweave too. That it was shut down. I was like, well, that sucks. Like, and I had this sort of interesting opportunity. I was like leaving a job and just wanted to do something else for a bit. So I did this Kickstarter, and I was like, okay, I will make it so that you can't shut it down. So the whole game is all run client side. And if you play it, you'll see you get this really super long URL, and that actually holds the entire game state. So like I have to keep paying the bill for the storage for it, but it's like pennies a month, So it's like, why would I shut it down? That would just be cruel. And then people can just play the game by passing URLs around. So in a way, it's like, okay, the perfect place for this ultimately is on Arweave. I've joked with people, it's like my work on Arweave is like the longest yak shave in the world, which is, just like you're doing something to accomplish some other goal, to get a place to put this ultimately.
It's pretty cool. I'm following you on Twitter now. I saw that you posted that you're going to be putting it on through Arweave. That's awesome. It's all connected. Nice.
Yeah, hopefully.
David.
Yes. At some point in the future that will definitely happen. If nothing else, I can just take the current version, throw it in a manifest, and it will live on Arweave forever. So I hope to do more than that. But, there's a lot of hoops to jump through to like build gateway networks and stuff first, which take a lot of time.
I know you told me before that you had a lot of answers to this question, but what other blockchain projects are you excited about outside of the Arweave ecosystem?
So I like Ethereum, I like Solana, and I like Agoric, which probably most people haven't heard of. And I'll explain why for each of those, because the why is really the thing I think matters. So I know, Ethereum is very, I think, divisive thing. Like some people really hate it. Some people really love it. The thing I like about it is I listen to all their dev calls, and I know that their ecosystem hasn't always been this way, but these days they put a lot of thought into how they are organizing their development. And it, I'm sure there's all kinds of like stuff happening behind the scenes. That's, little mini dramas and stuff, but, I think there's a lot to be learned there from how their community has matured and developed this kind of cross-team collaboration. I think some people would criticize it as being, sort of too centralized. Like there's a bunch of people. It's on YouTube, so it's not really like there's a bunch of people in a dark room figuring things out or something. But there is coordination happening. But if that's the kind of project you run or want to run, I think you can learn a lot from paying attention to how they're doing it. And if there's like past history that people are hung up on there, like look past that and see how they're doing things now. And I think there's a lot to learn. So Solana I love because, so my background is not crypto, it's like software engineering. And to me, Solana is like the software engineering chain. It's like just raw, brutalist engineering where people try to make computers do as much as they can do as fast as they can do it. The people who started it are like all ex-Qualcomm people. And I love that because I think like one thing that I see a lot in the crypto space is people just don't know some of the capabilities of modern hardware and just like the crazy amount of performance you can get out of them if you know how to use it. So I love just seeing a bunch of like hardcore engineers just squeezing all the juice out of the hardware and blowing people's minds. And then the last one I mentioned, which I just think is really cool from like a computer science perspective kind of, is Agoric, which smart contracts are full of like landmines and broken glass. They're incredibly hard to write well. And Agoric is a bunch of people, I guess it's a little bit similar to Solana, where it's like people with this existing experience in capabilities-based operating system security came in and designed a smart contracting system. And so it's just a way safer system. I think it might be a little too, it's maybe one of those systems where it's like too perfect in a way. I mean, not that there's no flaws in it, but like it's maybe over-engineered and it will not succeed because of that. But I think there's a lot to learn there that may be applicable to other systems.
One of the things it seems that people love about Arweave is that it goes beyond speculation. It actually is functional and it has a lot of utility. So how do you differentiate between speculative tokens and like the true functionality of certain Web3 projects?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think you kind of have to separate the token from the stuff people are building because, token price is driven by a lot of things. It's driven by like the tokenomics and just, whatever the kind of flavor of the month is. So I look at a lot of crypto projects and their current token valuations, and a lot of it looks pretty speculative. And, there's definitely value in Arweave, but there's a lot of speculation going on there too. But when I look at what's being built, people are building a lot of real projects. I would say most of the project people are trying to build are real things. It's like any startup, like a lot of those things are going to fail, but it's not because they're not trying to build real things. There's a lot of attempts to build real things. And that's what, really interests me about the ecosystem and keeps me interested in it. there's serious efforts to build things.
Before we talk about RIO, I wanted to talk about quickly StrongPool.
I would say at this point, a lot of the core technology is built. I think the thing I am trying to sort of juggle personally is bringing out a public release, is a lot more, takes a lot more than technology and will take a lot of my time. So I have to figure out a way to manage a public release at some point in a way that does not sabotage the efforts of like all the things I'm trying to build. So I think that's probably going to require me to scale the organization some, but like a lot of the technology there is built. Like just this past month, I think I got the final pieces in place to have the whole thing work, and it's been running privately for months now. Hasn't won a lot of blocks, but the functionality is all there. So yeah, it's coming along. I mean, stay tuned, and you'll hear more about it. I think the highest priority for me on that project is just to have a really sustainable, scalable way for people to run nodes for the network. And I think there's a variety of ways to do that. And the productization of the mining pool and the release of it is part of that. And where it comes will depend on my focus on other things as well.
Well, speaking of where your focus is going and what else you're working on, you are a system architect for RIO. What can we reveal about where that's at?
Yeah, so I think the core thing is just we've had this central gateway for Arweave that's existed for a while, and it's great. It's like served people pretty well. Not that there's never glitches, but I'm very excited that we're gonna take that and make it something that people can run. Maybe not in exactly the same form as it's running in the centralized version, because that's a big system. But the fact that people are going to be able to run a version of this themselves and provide access to Arweave themselves, I think is super exciting. I think that's both going to let a lot of people participate who couldn't before, and I think it's going to help with people in the ecosystem who are trying to develop and build. They'll be able to run things themselves and build on top of that and not be as reliant on one central system to build on. So I think it will help them a lot too. And I'm very excited about that.
I'm excited too. And if you all want to follow David, on Twitter, he's DJWHITT, DJ Wit. And on Patreon, it's the same thing, patreon.com/DJWHITT.
Follow me on Twitter is the best place to get my random thoughts and information about projects I'm working on. And there will be other places to get information on StrongPool. And certainly, there's existing places to follow ArDrive and RIO. But yeah, that's the best place. Things will branch out from there in the future.
Dave, you've been a very easy to talk to guest, and I love that you were thoughtful with your answers. And thank you for being on. I think this episode, I know this episode is going to be really interesting for people. So I appreciate your time.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's been great having a conversation with you.
Thanks, David. Great answers, great themes. And everyone check out his game because it's very creative and very unique. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another exciting interview. Thanks for listening. We'll see you then. Bye.